the Spider's Web is a soft reboot slash direct sequel to David Fincher's 2011 film, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. These films are based on books by Stieg Larsson. It was made into a Swedish trilogy first, and then a Hollywood version, directed by David Fincher, starring Daniel Craig, Rooney Mara, was made, and now this is the sequel. Rooney Mara and Daniel Craig are nowhere to be seen in this movie. They do not play their respective characters. Instead, Lisbeth Salander is played by Claire Foy instead of Rooney Mara, and Lisbeth Salander in this movie, she gets caught up in a web of spies, government officials, and cyber criminals. She comes across these nuclear launch codes for nuclear weapons, and she uncovers family secrets, and she brings Mikael Blomkvist, who is Daniel Craig's character in the David Fincher movie, along for the ride with her. The Girl in the Spider's Web. There's a lot to like about this movie. First of all, I think it's a well-directed movie. Fede Alvarez takes over behind the camera. David Fincher is no longer involved in the series. Fede Alvarez does a very good job at directing this movie. I think he gets the most out of his actors. He has a clear, distinct vision. Whether or not I agree with that vision, you'll see soon. But you could definitely tell he had a distinct vision with this movie. He had a great crew, great production design, great cinematography, great acting. He did a great job helming the action set pieces. Kudos to him. Like I said, he got a lot out of his actors. Claire Foy does a really good job in this movie, despite not saying that much. She doesn't have that much dialogue. Her dialogue is very minimal in this. I really like Claire Foy in this role. I thought that this was a perfect role for her. Going back to Fede Alvarez and the production crew, everything is great from a technical standpoint. The aesthetic of snow, we saw that in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. That is back in this one as well. All of that stuff, all of the technical stuff, and the acting and the directing in The Girl in the Spider's Web is very good. However, the rest of this movie, and what I mean by that is the writing. This is some of the most cliched, tired and true retreading of writing I have seen in a movie. This movie is very disappointing, especially comparing it to The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Dragon Tattoo is a far superior film. And here's the thing with Dragon Tattoo. Dragon Tattoo made you leave the theater feeling cold and damp and dour, and you were disturbed. It was just a dark mystery thriller. A lot of dark elements, a lot of dark themes in that movie. Not as many in this movie. This movie plays off more as an action film. And I don't think that's necessarily the way this movie should have went. For instance, opening scene is followed by a credit sequence. It was straight out of a James Bond movie. I swear to God, there are instances where the main character, Lisbeth Salander, is sneaking around places. She literally goes from troubled young lady to action heroine. This is a movie that isn't going to leave you feeling dark and cold and terrible about yourself. It's a yippee, look at me, action star type of movie. It's one of those. And I don't think that this is the movie that needs that type of thing. This isn't the way you should follow up a movie like Dragon Tattoo. In all honesty, this movie just feels like, at times it feels like a James Bond movie. Other times it feels like a Jason Bourne movie. It's a mishmash of the two, and it doesn't work with this story. This story is just so cliched. You've seen it all before, this story. Sure, I mean, there are movies that have done this recently. For instance, Mission Impossible Fallout. But the thing is with Mission Impossible Fallout, despite having nuclear weapons at the center of its plot, it added a fresh take to that plot. This feels like a retread. Just everything we've seen before. And in all honesty, it really took me out of the movie. This movie had me hooked from the get-go. I was in it for the first hour, and then the last hour of the movie kind of lost me. It tried to get clever, and then at times it was too simplistic, and then it would try and up that cleverness, to the point where it got a little convoluted, and it lost me, both mentally and physically. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the plot's a little convoluted, but physically this movie lost me because I just lost interest in the movie after a while. And it was putting me to sleep towards the end. I was legit starting to fall asleep. Nothing really, to me, was happening. Let's talk about the character of Mikael Blomkvist, who was portrayed by Daniel Craig in Dragon Tattoo, portrayed by somebody else completely different in this movie. Don't know his name. Not going to try and butcher that name. He honestly just feels like a part of the movie that is tacked on. His scenes are just inconsequential. If you take the character of Mikael Blomkvist out of this movie, it changes nothing. His scenes could honestly have been left on the cutting room floor. There's also another character in here who's a hacker who works for the NSA. He goes from being a hacker to a skilled marksman in the span of 2 minutes. I don't understand that. As I said, this movie is directed by Fede Alvarez. He was one of the contributors to the screenplay. Ultimately, I think that this screenplay ultimately suffers from the fact that there's just too many cooks in the kitchen with this movie. And I did a quick peruse on Wikipedia because this is based on the 4th book in the series, which isn't penned by the original author of the series. That the original author of the book series died. So somebody continued these stories. The Girl in the Spider's Web was the 4th one under a new author. I perused the plot of that book on Wikipedia. The movie has a completely different plot from the book. I can tell you that. I've never read the books, but just looking at what happens in that book compared to what happens in this movie, completely different. And I don't think fans of the Millennium series, which is what the book series is called and what the film series is ultimately going to be called, I don't think fans of the book are going to be too happy about that. This just feels like a quick cash grab from Sony because it's like, hey, we got to create a new action movie franchise. This is something that Warner Brothers could have done with a movie like Blade Runner 2049. They could have turned this into some big budget blockbuster action movie. And luckily they didn't. I feel that's what Sony did with The Girl in the Spider's Web. Because we saw just how grounded David Fincher made Dragon Tattoo. But now that he's not involved and you have a different person behind the camera, with a different crew, with a different set of actors, with a different set of writers, it seems like you can almost get away with something. And where Sony has lost the rights to the James Bond franchise, it's almost like Sony is looking at this as a way to create a new action franchise. And the Millennium series, or these girl with whatever, Dragon Tattoo, Spider's Web, whatever you want to call these movies, I don't think that this is necessarily the direction that this series has to go. And the problem with this movie is that, yeah, it's a soft reboot, while also being a sequel to Dragon Tattoo. But it also just feels like something that stands on its own, because it doesn't have any of the original actors. It doesn't have David Fincher as the director. It just feels like its own thing. It just feels like this feels like the first one in a new series of Dragon Tattoo movies. It's like the David Fincher one is just left out in the cold. Sony's like, just forget about that one. That's ultimately what this movie feels like. It's a very disappointing movie, and on its own, as it stands on its own, if this wasn't part of an actual series or a franchise of books, if this wasn't adapted from books, if this was just its own thing, disregard the fact that it was just an original movie, it wouldn't be that great either, because it's something we've seen so many times before, and it just takes itself too seriously in that regard, I think. I mean, this is a movie that does have to take itself seriously. There are definitely darker elements in this movie. The movie opens up with a very dark scene, something that would come straight out of the Dragon Tattoo movie, but it doesn't really follow through on those scenes. And that was the most disappointing aspect of this movie. The writing is just clunky. It's all over the place. And it lost me after a while. I didn't hate The Girl in the Spider's Web, but I obviously didn't love it. It's a very mixed bag for me. I'm going to give The Girl in the Spider's Web a C. Guys, thank you for sticking around with me for this review. As you can probably tell, I'm very tired. So, no, I am not high. Even though it looks like I'm high, I am not high. I'm just tired. That's my review of The Girl in the Spider's Web. I will leave my link to my official website in the description below. There you can find all my links to my social media accounts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe at the end of this video. My name is Alex Madden, and I will see you soon.